everyone. This is Sakutian. I hope y'all are having a good day. Give me just a couple minutes here. I am just getting everything good to go. I am going to check our audio and make sure we actually have audio because last time I streamed for like minutes with my audio. There we go. Okay, audio is working. We love it, we love it, we love it. I am going to do this, and we're going to tweet streaming weekend story time now. I almost typed bow. That would have been funny. Boop, there we go. I never put like links on my stuff because I always figure like at this point people who aren't here are never gonna come. So I'm just like, well, it is what it is. Streaming weekend story time now. Okay, there we go. That should be good. And that's all right there. Hello. Hi, Pebbles. Give me just another minute. I just got to do a blue sky announcement. And there's like, I should get this all ready to go so I can just like hit, you know, boop, 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 boop. But I'm a bad streamer. All right. Streaming weekend story time now. All right. There. There we go. Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope you are having a good day. I hope you are off to a good start of your weekend. If not, hopefully this will make it a little bit better for you. It has been a minute since I did any storytime streams. I've been doing a lot of like games and things, and I do love streaming games with y'all, but I want to do like I want to do other things too. I don't just want to stream games. I'm just fiddling with my tracking here. So like yeah, I this is kind of like one of the things I like doing. I like doing story times. I like doing like our doodles and noodles. I like doing like GIF on the Fifth. I have other things that I want to do that are not just me playing a game because like as much as I love playing games, I want to make other kinds of content too. So we haven't done a story time in a while. The last one I did was Winnie the Pooh. I wanted to read y'all The Wind in the Willows because it's like a bit longer. And I mean, you know, it's a fairly the version I'm reading is like 300 pages plus. So this will be our story time for a bit. Oh, I got a message. Who messaged me? Oh, oh, okay. Um, so yeah, we got a really cool little story time for y'all. I love The Wind in the Willows. I will freely admit I have not read the full book in the past. I've like seen like a couple of animated versions, and I just love like anthropomorphized animal stories, like animals that are like little people. I just think it's really cool. Um, just so you all know, in the background there is a game going. This is called On Track. This is a it's like an organizational, motivational type thing and it's really neat. It's like a little train. I have fiddled with the settings because I love the idea of like reading someone a book on the train, you know, like you're on a long trip. So I'm gonna hit play on this, and that way you all can see. Give me just a moment. We'll just make sure this is working. Okay, very nice, very nice. Um, Oh, I turned everything down. I'm gonna fiddle with the sounds a bit. Give me just a sec. You know what? I think I turned all of the sounds way down, but that's okay. We'll let that lie for today. And you can do, like, you can change the day. You can do different times if you like that. We're gonna do a nighttime because this is a bedtime story. And there we go. That's all good. I'm just gonna go scooch over here. I will turn on the fishing game for people. Just because it's fun. I know y'all like the fishing game, so I will turn on the fishing game, and that way you can fish if you want to. I'm gonna shrink down just a bit. Alright, and this is a very, very scuffy story time already. Let me see here. I forget what this does. I have no idea what the setting does. But yeah, this is a neat game. If you like trains and like organizational stuff, like you can play different music and stuff in the background. I didn't opt for that because copyright and everything, and all that good stuff. Let me make sure the fish game is actually working. Fish. All right, fish is working. So yeah, we're just gonna chill. I'm gonna read you the Wind in the Willows for a bit, and we're gonna have a nice, relaxing time. These streams are always a little more chill. Like, I'm not gonna get wild and zany with y'all here. This is meant to be relaxing. I do have a couple of these up on my YouTube channel as well. Again, I've done Winnie the Pooh. That's the big one we've done so far. So, again, this is The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Chapter 1, The Riverbank. The mole had been working very hard all the morning, spring cleaning his little home. First with brooms, then with dusters, then on ladders and steps and chairs, with a brush and a pail of whitewash, till he had dust in his throat and eyes, and splashes of whitewash all over his black fur, and an aching back and weary arms. Spring was moving in the air above and in the earth below, and around him, penetrating even in his dark little lowly house, with its spirit of divine discontent and longing. It was a small wonder, then, that he suddenly flung down his brush on the floor and said, "Bother," and "Oh, blow," and also, "Hang spring cleaning," and bolted out of the house without even waiting to put on his coat. Something up above was calling him imperiously, and he made for the steep little tunnel which answered, in his case, to the gravelled carriage drive, owned by animals whose residences are nearer to the sun and air. So he scraped and scratched and scrabbled and scrooged, and then he scrooged again, and scrabbled and scratched and scraped, working busily with his little paw and muttering to himself, up we go, till at last, pop, his snout came out into the sunlight, and he found himself rolling in the warm grass of a great meadow. This is fine, he said to himself. This is better than whitewashing. The sunshine struck hot on his fur. Soft breezes caressed his heated brow, and after the seclusion of the cellarage he had lived so long in, the carol of happy birds fell on his dulled hearing almost like a shout. Jumping off all his 4 legs at once in the joy of living and the delight of spring, without its cleaning, he pursued his way across the meadow till he reached the hedge on the further side. "Hold up," said an elderly rabbit at the gap. "6 pence for the privilege of passing by the private road." He was bowled over in an instant by the impatient and contemptuous mole, who trotted alongside the side of the hedge, chaffing the other rabbits as they peeped hurriedly from their holes to see what the row was all about. Onion sauce, he remarked jeeringly, and was gone before they could think thoroughly of a satisfactory reply. Then they all started grumbling at each other. "How stupid are you? Why didn't you tell him?" "Well, why didn't you say?" "You might have reminded him," and so on in the usual way, but of course it was then too much too late, as is always the case. It all seemed to be too good to be true. Hither and thither through the meadow he rambled busily, along the hedgerows, across the copses, finding everywhere birds building, flowers budding, and leaves thrusting, everything happy and progressive and occupied. And instead of having an uneasy conscience pricking him and whispering whitewash, he somehow could only feel how jolly he felt, and how wonderful it was to be out, the only idle dog among all these busy citizens. After all, the best part of a holiday is perhaps not so much to be resting yourself as to see all the other fellows busy working. He thought his happiness was complete, when as he meandered aimlessly along, suddenly he stood by the edge of a full-fledged river. Never in his life had he seen a river before, This sleek, sinuous, full-bodied animal, chasing and chuckling, gripping things with a gurgle and leaving them with a laugh, to fling itself on the fresh playmats, to fling itself on fresh playmates that shook themselves free and were caught and held again. All was and were caught and held again. Oh, all was a shake and a shiver, glints and gleams and sparkles, rustle and swirl, chatter and bubble. The mole was bewitched, entranced, fascinated. By the side of the river he trotted as one trots, when very small, by the side of a man who holds one spellbound by exciting stories. When he tired at last, he sat on the bank, while the river still chattered on to him, a babbling procession of the best stories in the world, sent from the heart of the earth to be told at last to the insatiable sea. As he sat on the grass and looked across the river, a dark hole opened in the bank opposite. Just above the water's edge, it caught his eye, and dreamily he fell to considering what a nice, snug dwelling place it would make for an animal with a few wants and a fond riverside residence, above a flood level and remote from noise and dust. As he gazed, something bright and small seemed to twinkle down in the heart of it, vanished, then twinkled once more like a tiny star. But it could hardly be a star, in such an unlikely situation, and it was too glittering and small for a glowworm. Then as he looked, it winked at him, and so declared itself to be an eye. A small face began gradually to grow up around it, like a frame round a picture. A brown little face with whiskers, a grave round face with the same twinkle in its eye that had first attracted his notice, small neat ears and thick silky hair. It was a water rat. Then the two animals stood and regarded each other cautiously. "Hello, Mole," said the rat. "Hello, Rat," said the Mole. "Would you like to come over?" inquired the rat presently. "Oh, it's all very well to talk," said the Mole rather pettishly. He was new to river and new to riverside life and its ways. The rat said nothing, but stopped and unfastened a rope and hauled on it, then lightly stepped into a little boat which Mole had not observed. It was painted, blue outside and white within, and was just the size for two animals. I'm just fiddling with my tracking, sorry. And Mole's heart went out to it at once, even though he did not yet fully understand its uses. The rat sculled smartly across and made fast. Then he held up his forepaw as the Mole stepped gingerly down. "Lean on that," he said. "Now then, step lively." And the Mole, to his surprise and rapture, found himself actually seated in the stern of a real boat. "This has been a wonderful day," said he, as the rat shoved off and took the sculls again. "Do you know I've never been in a boat before in all my life?" "What?" cried the rat, open-mouthed. "Never been in a... You never... Well, What have you been doing, then?" "Is it so nice as all that?" asked the Mole shyly, though he was quite prepared to believe, as he leaned back into his seat and surveyed the cushions, the oars, and the rowlocks, and all the fascinating fittings, and felt the boat sway lightly under him. "Nice. It's the only thing," said Water Rat, solemnly, as he leaned forward for a stroke. "Believe me, my young friend, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats. Simply messing," he went on dreamily. "Messing about in boats. Messing. Look ahead, Rat," cried Mole suddenly. It was too late. The boat struck the bank full tilt. The dreamer, the joyous oarsman, lay on his back at the bottom of the boat, his heels in the air. "About in boats, or with boats," said Rat. And he went on composedly, picking himself up with a pleasant laugh. "In or out of them, it doesn't matter. Nothing seems to really matter. That's the charm of it. Whether you get away or whether you don't, whether you arrive at your destination or whether you reach somewhere else, or whether you never get anywhere at all, you're always busy and you never do anything in particular. And when you've done it, there's always something else to do. And you can do it if you like, but you'd better not, much better not. Look here, if you've really nothing else on hand this morning, suppose we drop down the river together and have a long day of it." The Mole waggled his toes from sheer happiness, spread his chest with a high, full contentment, and leaned back blissfully into the soft cushions. "What a day I'm having," he said. "Let's start at once." "Hold hard a minute, then." Just a moment, I'm just adjusting something here. Thank you. He looped the painter through the ring in his landing stage, climbed up into his hole above, and after a short interval reappeared staggering under a fat wicker luncheon basket. Shove that under your feet, he observed to the mole as he passed it down into the boat. Then he untied the painter and took the skulls again. What's inside it? Asked Mole, wriggling with curiosity. There's cold chicken inside of it, he replied briefly. Cold tongue ham, cold whole beef, pickled gherkins, French crescent sandwiches, potted meat, ginger beer, lemonade, soda water. Oh, stop, stop, cried Mole in ecstasy. This is too much. Do you really think so? Inquired the rat seriously. It's only what I always take on these little excursions, and the other animals are always telling me that I'm a mean beast and I cut it very fine. The mole never heard a word he was saying, absorbed in the new life he was entering upon, intoxicated with the sparkle, the ripple, the scents, and the sounds in the sunlight. He trailed upon the water and dreamed long dreams. The water rat, like the good little fellow he was, sculled steadily on, and forbore to disturb him. I like your clothes awfully, old chap, he remarked, after half an hour or so had passed. He's a nice little rat. I'm going to get a black velvet smoking suit some day myself, as soon as I can afford it. I beg your pardon, said the mole, pulling himself together with an effort. You must think me very rude, but this is all so new to me. So this is a river? The river, corrected Rat. And you really live by the river? What a jolly life. I got a message. Okay, all good. By it and with it and on it and in it, said the rat. It's a brother and a sister to me. And aunts, and company, and food, and drink, and naturally washing. It's my world, and I don't want any other. What it hasn't got is not worth having, and what it doesn't know is not worth knowing. Lord, the times we've had together, whether in the winter or summer, spring or autumn, it's always got its fun, and its excitements. When the floods are on the February, and my cellars and basement are brimming with drink that's no good to me, and the brown water runs by my bedroom window, or again when it all drops away and shows patches of mud that smells like plum cake, and the rushes and weeds clog the channels, and I can potter about dry shoed over most of the bed of it, and find fresh food to eat and things careless people have dropped out of boats. But isn't it a bit dull at times, the mole ventured to ask. Just you and the river and no one else to pass a word with. No one else to... Well, I mustn't be hard on you, said Rat with forbearance. You're new to it, and of course you don't know. The bank is so crowded nowadays that many people are moving away altogether. Oh no, it isn't what it used to be at all. Otters, kingfishers, dabchicks, moorhens, all of them about all day long, and always wanting you to do something, as if a fellow had no business of his own to attend to. What lies over there? Asked Mole, waving a paw towards the background of woods and that darkly framed the wet water meadows on one side of the river. That? Oh, that's just the wildwood, said the rat shortly. We don't go there very much, we riverbankers. Aren't they very nice people in there? Said the mole, a trifle nervously. Well, replied the rat, let me see. The squirrels are all right, and the rabbits, some of them, but rabbits are a mixed lot, and then there's a badger, of course. He lives right in the heart of it, wouldn't live anywhere else either if you paid him to do it, dear old badger. Nobody interferes with him. They better not, he added significantly. Why, who should interfere with him? Asked the mole. Well, of course there are others, explained Rat in a hesitating sort of way. Weasels and stoats and foxes and so on. They're all right in a way. I'm very good friends with them, past the time of day when we meet and all that. But they break out sometimes, there's no denying, and, well, you can't really trust them, and that's the fact. The mole knew that it was quite against animal etiquette to dwell on possible trouble ahead, or even allude to it, so he dropped the subject. And beyond the wildwood again, he asked, where it's all blue and dim, and one sees what may be hills, or perhaps they mayn't, and something that smokes of and something that looks like the smoke of towns, or is it only cloud drift? Beyond the wild wood comes the wide world, said Rat, and that's something that doesn't matter to either you or me. I've never been there, and I'm never going. Nor you either, if you've got any sense at all. Don't ever refer to it again, please. Now then, here's our backwater at last, where we're going to lunch. Leaving the main stream, they now passed into what seemed at first like a little landlocked lake. Green turf sloped down to either edge, brown, snaky tree roots gleamed below the surface of the quiet water, while ahead of them the silvery shoulder and foamy tumble of a weir, arm in arm with a restless, dripping mill wheel that held up in turn a great gray marbled mill house, filled the air with a soothing murmur of sound, dull and smothery, yet with a little clear voice speaking up cheerfully out of it at intervals. It was ever so beautiful that Mole could only hold up both forepaws and say, "Oh my, oh my, oh my." The rat brought the boat alongside the bank, made her fast, and helped the still awkward Mole safely ashore, and swung out the luncheon basket. The Mole begged as a favor to be allowed to unpack it all by himself, and the rat was very pleased to indulge him, and to sprawl at full length on the grass and rest, while his excited friend shook out the tablecloth and spread it, took out all the mysterious packets one by one and arranged their contents in due order, still gasping. When all was ready, the rat said, "Now pitch in, old fellow," and the Mole was indeed very glad to obey, for he had started his spring cleaning at a very early hour, and people will do, and he had not paused for a bite or sup, and he had been through a very great deal since that distant time which now seemed so many days ago. "What are you looking at?" said the rat presently, when the edge of their hunger was somewhat dulled, and Mole's eyes were able to wander off to the tablecloth a little. "I'm looking," said the Mole, "at a streak of bubbles that I see traveling along the surface of the water. That is a thing that strikes me as funny." "Bubbles? Oh," said Rat with a chirrup, cheerily in its inviting sort of way. A broad, glistening muzzle showed itself above the edge of the bank, and an otter hauled himself out of the water, shaking the water from his coat. "Greedy beggars," he observed, making for the provender. "Why didn't you invite me, Ratty?" "This was an impromptu affair," explained the rat. "By the way, my friend Mr. Mole." "Proud, I'm sure," said the otter, and the two animals were friends forthwith. "Such a rumpus everywhere," continued the otter. "All the world seems out on the river today. I came up this backwater to try and get a moment's peace, and then stumble upon you fellows. At least I beg your pardon. I don't exactly mean that, you know." There was a rustle behind them, proceeding from the hedge where in the last year's leaves still clung thick, and a stripy head with high shoulders behind it peered forth on them. "Come on, old badger," shouted the rat. The badger trotted forward a pace or two, then grunted, "Humph, company," and turned his back and disappeared from view. "That's just the sort of fellow he is," observed the disappointed rat. "Simply hates society. Now we shan't see any more of him today. Well, tell us, who's out on the river?" "Toad's out for one," replied the otter, in his brand new wager boat. New togs, new everything. The two animals looked at each other and laughed. "Once it was nothing but sailing," said the rat. "Then he tired of that and he took to punting. Nothing would please him but to punt all day, every day, and a nice mess he made of it. Last year it was houseboating, and we all knew how that had to go stay with him on his houseboat, and pretend how much we liked it. He was going to spend the rest of his life in a houseboat. It's all the same, whatever he takes up. He gets tired of it and starts something fresh." Let me just adjust here. Sorry, everybody. Just a moment. Hope you're enjoying the story. "Such a good fellow, too," remarked the otter reflectively, "but no stability, especially in a boat. From where they sat, they could get a glimpse of the main stream across the island that separated them, and just then a wager boat flashed into view, the rower, a short, stout figure, splashing badly and rolling a good deal, but working his hardest. The rat stood up and hailed him, but Toad, for what it was, shook his head and settled sternly to his work. He'll be out of that boat in a minute if he rolls like that," Rat said, sitting down again. "Of course he will," chuckled the otter. "Did I ever tell you that the good story about Toad and the lock-keeper? It happened this way. Toad, an errant mayfly, swerved unsteadily athwart and current in the intoxicated fashion, affected by young blood of mayflies, seeing life, a swirl of water and a kloop, and the mayfly was visible no more. Neither was the otter. The Mole looked down. The voice was still in his ears, but the turf whereupon he had sprawled was clearly vacant. Not an otter to be seen, as far as the distant horizon. But again there was a streak of bubbles on the surface of the river. The rat hummed a tune, and the Mole recollected that animal etiquette forbade any sort of comment on the sudden disappearance of one's friends at any moment, for any reason, or no reason whatever. "Well, well," said Rat, "I suppose we ought to be moving. I wonder which of us had better pack the luncheon basket," he said, not he did not speak as if he were frightfully eager for the treat. "Oh, please, let me," said Mole. So of course the rat let him. Packing the basket was not so much of a pleasant activity as unpacking the basket had been. It never is. But the mole was bent over enjoying everything, and although just when he had gotten the basket packed and strapped up tightly, he saw a plate staring up at him from the grass, and when the job had been done again, the rat pointed out a fork which anybody ought to have seen, and last of all, behold, the mustard pot which he had been sitting on without knowing it. Still, somehow, the thing got finished at last. Without much loss of temper, the afternoon sun was getting low as the rat sculled gently homewards in the dreamy mood, murmuring poetry things over to himself and not paying much attention to Mole. But the Mole was very full of lunch and self-satisfaction and pride, and already quite at home in a boat, so he thought, and was getting a bit restless besides, and presently he said, "Ratty, please, I want to row now." The rat shook his head with a smile. "Not yet, my young friend," he said. "Wait till you've had a few lessons. It's not as easy as it looks." The Mole was quiet for a minute or two, but he began to feel more and more jealous of Rat, sculling so strongly and so easily along, and his pride began to whisper that he could do it every bit as well. He jumped up and seized the sculls so suddenly that Rat, who was gazing out over the water and saying more poetry things to himself, was taken by surprise and fell backwards off his seat with his legs in the air for the second time, while the triumphant Mole took his place and grabbed the sculls and with an entire sense of confidence. "Stop it, you silly ass," cried Rat from the bottom of the boat. "You can't do it. You'll have us over." The Mole flung his sculls back with flourish and made a great dig at the water. He missed the surface altogether. His legs flew up above his head and he found himself lying on top of the prostrate Rat. Greatly alarmed, he made a grab at the side of the boat, and the next moment, sploosh! Over went the boat, and he found himself struggling in the river. Oh my, how cold the water was, and oh, how very wet it felt. How it sang in his ears as he went down, down, down. How bright and welcome the sun looked as he rose to the surface, coughing and sputtering. How black was his despair when he felt himself sinking again. Then a firm paw gripped him by the back of the neck. It was Rat, and he was evidently laughing. The Mole could feel him laughing right down his arms through his paw, and so into it, the Mole's neck. The Rat got a hold of a skull and shoved it under the Mole's arm. He then did the same by the other side of him, and swimming behind, propelled the helpless animal to shore, hauled him out, set him down on the bank, a squashy, pulpy lump of misery. When the Rat had rubbed him down a bit and wrung some of the wet from him, he said, "Now and then, old fellow, trot up and down the towing path as hard as you can, till you're warm and dry again, while I dive for the luncheon basket." So the dismal Mole, wet without and ashamed within, trotted about until he was fairly dry, while the Rat plunged into the water again, recovered the boat, righted her, and made her fast. Hello, Pichu. Welcome in. I am reading The Wind in the Willows. This is a calm story time. Thank you for joining. Let's see. Here we go. Made her fast, fetched his floating property to shore by degrees, and finally dived successfully for the luncheon basket and struggled to land with it. When all was ready for a start once more, the Mole, limp and dejected, took his seat in the stern of the boat, and as they set off, he said in a low voice, broken with emotion, "Ratty, my generous friend, I am very sorry indeed for my foolish and ungrateful conduct." Sorry, I got a message. My heart quite fails me when I think about how I might have lost the beautiful luncheon basket. Indeed, I have been a complete ass, and I know it. Will you overlook it this once and forgive me and let things go on as before? "That's all right, bless you," responded the Rat cheerily. "What's a little water on a water rat? I'm more in the water than out of it most days. Don't you think any more about it. And look here, I really think you had better come and stop with me for a little time. It's plain and rough, you know, not like Toad's house at all. But you haven't seen that yet. Still, I can make you comfortable, and I'll teach you how to row and swim, and soon you'll be as handy on the water as any of us." The Mole was so touched by his kind manner of speaking that he could find no voice to answer him, and he had to brush away a tear or two with the back of his paw. But the Rat kindly looked on in another direction, and presently the Mole's spirits revived again, and he was even able to give some straight-back talk to a couple of moorhens who were sniggering to each other about his bedraggled appearance. When they got home, the rat made a bright fire in the parlor and planted the mole in an armchair in front of it, having fetched down a dressing gown and slippers for him, and told him river stories till supper time. Very thrilling stories they were, too, to an earth dwelling animal like Mole. Stories about weirs and sudden floods, and leaping pike, and streamers that flung hard bottles. At least bottles were suddenly flung, and from steamers, so presumably by them, and about herons, and how particular they were with whom they spoke to, and about the adventures down drains, and night fishing with otter, or excursions far afield with badger. Supper was a most cheerful meal, but very shortly afterwards it was a terribly sleepy mole who had to be escorted upstairs by his considerate host to the best bedroom, where he soon laid his head on his pillow in a great peace and contentment, knowing that his new-found friend the river was lapping the sill of his window. This day was only the first of many similar days for the emancipated mole, each of them longer and full of interest as the ripening summer moved onward. He learned to swim and to row, and he entered into the joy of running water, and with his ear to the reed stems he caught at intervals something of what the wind went whispering so constantly among them. That was chapter 1. That was the river. That was on the river bank. This is chapter 2. The open road. Ratty, said Mole suddenly, one bright summer morning, if you please, I want to ask you for a favor. The rat was sitting on the river bank singing a little song. He had just composed it to himself, so he was happy to take up with it, and he would not pay proper attention to Mole or anything else. Since early that morning he had been swimming in the river in the company of his friend the ducks, and when the ducks stood on their heads suddenly, as ducks will do, he would dive down and tickle their necks just under where their chins would be if ducks had chins, till they were forced to continue to the surface again in a hurry, sputtering and angry and shaking their feathers at him, for it's impossible to say quite all you feel when your head's under water. At last they implored him to go away, and to attend to his own affairs, and to leave them to mind theirs. So the rat went away, and sat on the river bank in the sun, and made up a song about them, which he called Duck's Ditty. Duck's Ditty. Alright, let's see here. What's this? All along the bank, all along the backwater, through the rushes tall, ducks are a-dabbling, up tails all. Ducks' tails, drakes' tails, yellow feet a-quiver, yellow bills all out of sight, busy in the river. Slushy green undergrowth, where the roach swim. Here we keep our larder, cool and full and dim. Everyone for what he likes. We like to be heads up, heads down, tails up, dabbling free. High in the blue above, swift whirls and call. We are downing a-dabbling, up tails all. I don't know that I think so very much of that little song, Rat, observed the mole cautiously. He was no poet himself, and he didn't care who knew it, and he had a candid nature. Nor did the ducks, replied the rat cheerfully. They say, why can't fellows be allowed to do what they like, when they like, and as they like, instead of other fellows sitting on banks and watching them all the time, and making remarks and poetry and things about them? What nonsense it all is. That's what the ducks say. So it is, said Mole with great heartiness. No, it isn't, cried Rat indignantly. Well, then, it isn't, replied Mole soothingly, but what I wanted to ask you is, why don't we make a call on Mr. Toad? I've heard so much about him, and I do so want to make his acquaintance. Why, certainly, said the good-natured Rat, jumping to his feet and dismissing poetry from his mind for the day. Get the boat out, and we'll paddle up there for once. It's never the wrong time to call on Toad. Early or late, he's always the same fellow, always good-tempered, always glad to see you, always sorry when you go. He must be a very nice animal, observed the Mole as he got into the boat and took the sculls, while Rat settled himself comfortably into the stern. He is indeed the best of animals, replied Rat, so simple, so good-natured, and so affectionate. Perhaps he's not very clever, we can't all be geniuses, and it may be that he got a bit boastful and conceited, but he has got some great qualities, our Toad. Rounding a bend in the river, they came in sight of a handsome, dignified old house, mellowed red brick, with well-kept lawns reaching down to the water's edge. There's Toad Hall, said Rat, and that creek on the left where the notice board says private, no landing allowed, leads to his boathouse, where we'll leave the boat. The stables are over there to the right. That's the banqueting hall you're looking at now. Very old, that is. Toad's rather rich, you know, and this is really one of the nicest houses in these parts, though we never admit as much to Toad. They glided up the creek, and Mole shook his skulls as they passed into the shadow of a large boathouse. Here they saw many handsome boats slung with crossbeams or hauled up on a slip, but none in the water, and the place had an unused and deserted air. The rat looked around him. "I understand," he said. "Boating is played out. He's tired of it and done with it. I wonder what new fad he's taken up with now. Come along and let's look him up. We shall hear all about it quite soon enough." He's a toad. Oh, my mouse is on the screen. That is fine. Okay. There we go. They disembarked and strolled across the gay, flower-decked lawns in search of Toad, whom they presently happened upon resting in a wicker garden chair with a preoccupied expression on his face and a large map spread out on his knees. "Hooray!" he cried, jumping up and seeing them. "This is splendid." He shook the paws of both of them warmly, never wanting for an introduction to Mr. Mole. "How kind of you," he went on, dancing around them. "I was just going to send a boat down the river for you, Ratty, with strict orders that you were to be fetched up here at once, whatever you were doing. I want you badly, both of you. Now what will you take? Come inside and have something. You don't know how lucky it is you're turning up just now." "Let's sit quiet a bit, Toady," said Rat, throwing himself into an easy chair, while the Mole took another by the side of him and made some civil remark about Toad's delightful residence. "Finest house on the whole river," cried Toad boisterously. "Or anywhere else for that matter," he could not help adding. Here the Rat nudged Mole. Unfortunately, the Toad saw him do it and turned very red. There was a moment's painful silence, then Toad burst out laughing. "All right, Ratty," he said. "It's only my way, you know. And it's not such a very bad house, is it, you know? You rather like it yourself. Now then, look this way. Let's be sensible. You are the very animals I wanted. You've got to help me. It's most important." "It's about your rowing, I suppose," said Rat with an innocent air. "You're getting on fairly well, though you splash a good bit still. With a great deal of patience and any quantity of coaching, you may—" "Oh, pooh, boating," interrupted Toad, in great disgust. "Silly, boyish amusement. I've given that up long ago. Sheer waste of time, that's what it is. It makes me downright sorry to see you fellows, who ought to know better, spending all your energies in the aimless manner. No, I've discovered the real thing, the only genuine occupation for a lifetime. I propose to devote the remainder of mine to it, and I can only regret the wasted years that lie behind me, squandered in trivialities. Come with me, dear Ratty, and your amiable friend also, if you would be so very kind, just as far as the stable-yard, and you'll see what I have." He led the way to the stable-yard, accordingly. Then Rat followed with a most mistrustful expression, and there, drawn out of the coach-house in the open, was a caravan, shining with newness, painted a canary yellow, picked with green and red wheels. "There you are," said Toad, straddling and expanding himself. "There's a real life for you, embodied in that little cart. The open road, the dusty highway, the heath, the common hedgerows, the rolling downs, camps, villages, towns, cities. Here today, up and off tomorrow, who else knows where? Travel, change, interest, excitement, the whole world before you, and a horizon that's always changing. And mind, this is the very finest cart of its sort, and was ever built, without any exception. Come inside and look at the arrangements. Planned them all myself." The Mole was tremendously interested and excited, and followed him eagerly up the steps and into the interior of the caravan. The Rat only snorted and thrust his hands deep into his pockets, remaining where he was. It was indeed very compact and comfortable. Little sleeping bunks, a little table that folded up against the wall, a cooking stove, lockers, bookshelves, a bird cage with a bird in it, and pots, pans, jugs, kettles of every size and variety. "All complete," said Toad triumphantly, pulling open a locker. "You see, biscuits, potted lobsters, sardines, everything you can possibly want. Soda water here. Backy there, letter paper, bacon, jam, cards, and dominoes, you'll find." He continued as they descended the steps again. "You'll find that nothing whatever has been forgotten when we make our start this afternoon." "I beg your pardon," said the Rat slowly, as he chewed his straw. "But I did overhear you say something about we and start and this afternoon." "Now, you dear good old Ratty," said Toad imploringly, "don't begin talking in that stiff and sniffy sort of way because you know you've got to come. I can't possibly manage without you, so please consider it settled, and don't argue. It's the one thing I can't stand." "You surely don't mean to stick to your dull, fustery old river life, and just live in a hole on a bank in a boat? just want to show you the world. I'm going to make an animal of you, my boy. I don't care, said Rat doggedly, and I'm not coming, and that's flat. And I am not going to stick to, and am going to stick to my old river and live in a hole in a boat as I've always done. And what's more, Mole's going to stick to me and do as I do, aren't you, Mole? Of course I am, said Mole loyally. I'll always stick to you, Rat, and what you say is to be has got to be. All the same, it sounds as if it might have been, well, rather fun, you know, he said wistfully. Poor Mole. The life adventures was such a new thing to him and so thrilling, and this fresh aspect of it was so tempting. And he had fallen in love at first sight with the canary-colored cart and all of its little fitments. The Rat saw what was passing in his mind and wavered. He hated disappointing people, and he was fond of Mole, and he would do almost anything to oblige him. Toad was watching them both closely. Come along in and have some lunch, he said diplomatically, and we'll talk it over. We don't need to decide anything in a hurry. Of course, I don't really care. I only want to give pleasure to you fellows. Live for others, that's my motto in life. During luncheon, which was excellent, of course, as everything at Toad Hall always was, the Toad simply let himself go. Disregarding the Rat, he proceeded to play upon the inexperienced Mole as on a harp. Naturally a voluble animal, and always mastered by his imagination, he painted the prospects of the trip and the joys of the open life on the roadside in such glowing colors that Mole could hardly sit in his chair for excitement. Somehow it soon seemed taken for granted by all three of them that the trip was a settled thing, and the Rat, though still unconvinced in his mind, allowed his good nature to override his personal objections. He could not bear to disappoint his two friends, who were already deep in their schemes and anticipations. I'm just checking something really quick here. Give me just a sec. Sorry. Okay. My page was not turning as I wanted it to. Planning out each day's separate occupation for several weeks ahead. When they were quite ready, the now triumphant Toad led his companions to the paddock and set them to capture the old gray horse, who, without having been consulted, and to his own extreme annoyance, had been told off by Toad for the dustiest job in the dusty expedition. He frankly preferred the paddock and took a deal of catching. Meantime, Toad packed the lockers with tighter and tighter necessities, and hung nose bags, nets of onions, bundles of hay, and baskets from the bottom of the cart. At last the horse was caught and harnessed, and they set off, all talking at once, each animal either trudging by the side of the cart, or sitting on the shaft as the humor took him. It was a golden afternoon. The smell of the dust they kicked up was rich and satisfying. Out of a thick orchard on either side of the road, birds called and whistled to them cheerily. Good-natured wayfarers passing them gave them good day, or stopped to say nice things about their beautiful cart, and rabbits sitting at their front doors in the hedgerows held up their old forepaws to say, "Oh my, oh my, oh my." Hi, Pebbles. I hope you're enjoying the story. If it looks like I'm like looking down, it's because I'm literally looking down to read the book. All right. Late in the evening, tired and happy and miles from home, they drew up on a remote common far from habitations, turned the horse loose to graze, and ate their simple supper, sitting in the grass by the side of the cart. Toad talked big about how he was going to do in the days to come, while stars grew fuller and larger all around them, and a yellow moon appearing suddenly and silently from nowhere in particular came to keep them company and listen to their talk. At last they turned into their little bunks in the cart, and Toad, kicking out his legs, said sleepily, "Well, good night, you fellows. This is the real life for a gentleman. Talk about your old river." "I don't talk about my river," replied the patient Rat. "You know I don't, Toad, but I think about it," he said pathetically in a lower tone. "I think about it all the time." The Mole reached out from under his blanket, felt the Rat's paw in the darkness, and gave it a squeeze. "I'll do whatever you like, Ratty," he whispered. "Shall we run away to the morrow morning? Quite early, very early, and go back to our dear old hole in the river?" No, we'll see it out," he whispered back to the Rat. "Thanks awfully, but I ought to stick by Toad till the trip's ended. It won't be safe for him to be left by himself. It won't take very long. His fads never do. Good night." The end was indeed nearer than ever the Rat expected. After so much open air and excitement, the Toad slept very soundly, and no amount of shaking could rouse him from the bed of the next morning. So the Mole and Rat turned to, quietly and manfully, and while the Rat saw to the horse and lit a fire and cleared the last night's cups and platters and got things ready for breakfast, The mole trudged off to the nearest village a long way off for milk and eggs and various necessities the toad had, of course, forgotten to provide. The hard work had all been done, and the two animals were resting, thoroughly exhausted by the time Toad appeared in the scene, fresh and gay, remarking what a pleasant, easy life it was they were leading now, after all the cares and worries and fatigue of housekeeping at home. They had a pleasant ramble that day, over grassy downs and along narrow by-lanes, and camped as before on a common, only this time the two guests took care that Toad should do his fair share of the work. In consequence, when the time came for the starting the next morning, Toad was by no means so rapturous about the simplicity of the primitive life, and indeed attempted to resume his place in his bunk whence he was hauled by force. Their waylay, as before, came across a country of narrow lanes, and it was not till the afternoon that they came out on the open high road, their first high road. And there, disaster, fleet and unforeseen, sprang on them. Disaster momentous indeed to their expedition, but simply overwhelming in its effect on the after career of Toad. They were strolling along the high road easily, the mole by the horse's head talking to him, since the horse had complained that he was being frightfully left out, and nobody considered him in the least. The toad and the water rat walking behind the cart talking together. At least Toad was talking, and yet Rat was saying at intervals, "Yes, precisely, and what did you say to him?" And thinking of all the time of something very different, when far behind them they heard a faint warning hum like the drone of a distant bee. Glancing back, they saw a small cloud of dust, with a dark center of energy advancing on them at incredible speed, while from out of the dust a faint poop poop wailed like an uneasy animal in pain. Hardly regarding it, they turned to resume their conversation when, in an instant, it seemed, the peaceful scene was changed, and with a blast of wind and a whirl of sound that made them jump for the nearest ditch, it was on them. The poop poop rang with a brazen shout in their ears, and they had a moment's glimpse of an interior of glittering plate glass with rich morocco, and the magnificent motor car, immense, breath-snatching, passionate, with its pilot tense and hugging his wheel, possessed all earth and air for the fraction of a second, flung an enveloping cloud of dust that blinded and enwrapped them utterly, and then dwindled to a speck in the far distance, changed back into a droning bee once more. The old gray horse, dreaming as he plodded along in his quiet paddock in a new raw situation such as this, simply abandoned himself to his natural emotions, rearing and plunging backing steadily in spite of all the efforts of Mole and his head, and all the mole's lively language directed at his better feelings. He drove the cart backwards towards the deep ditch at the side of the road. It wavered an instant, and then there was a heart-rending crash, and the canary-colored cart, their pride and joy, lay in the side of the ditch, an irredeemable wreck. The rat danced up and down the road, simply transported with passion. "You villains!" he shouted, shaking both fists. "You scoundrels! You highwaymen! You road hogs! I'll have the law of you! I'll report you! I'll take you through all the courts!" His homesickness had quite slipped away from him for the moment, and he was the skipper of the canary-colored vessel driven on a shoal by the reckless jockeying of rival mariners. And he was trying to recollect all the fine and biting things he used to say to masters and steamers who launched things when they're wash, and they drove to the near the bank, used the flood of his parlor-carpeted home. Toad sat straight down in the middle of the dusty road, his legs stretched out before him, and stared fixedly in the direction of the disappearing motor car. He breathed short. His face wore a placid, satisfied expression, and at intervals he faintly murmured, "Poop poop." The mole was busy trying to quiet the horse, which he succeeded in doing after a time. Then he went to look at the cart, and on its side in the ditch. It was indeed a sorry sight. Panels and windows smashed, axle hopelessly bent, one wheel off, sardine tins scattered over the wide world, and the bird in the birdcage sobbing pitifully and calling to be let out. The rat came to help him, but their united efforts were not sufficient to right the cart. "Hi, Toad," they cried. "Come on and bear a hand, can't you?" The toad never answered a word or budged from his seat on the road. So they went to see what was the matter with him. They found him in a sort of trance, a happy smile on his face, his eyes still fixed on the dusty wake of their destroyer. At intervals he was heard to murmur, "Poop poop." The rat shook his shoulder. "Are you coming to help us, Toad?" he demanded sternly. Glorious, stirring sight, murmured Toad, never offering to move. The poetry of motion, the real way to travel, the only way to travel. Here today, in next week tomorrow. Villages skipped, towns and cities jumped, always someone else's horizon. Oh, bliss, oh, poop, poop, oh, my, oh, my. Oh, stop being an ass, Toad, said Mole despairingly. And to think I never knew, went on Toad in a dreamy monotone. All those wasted years that lie behind me. I never knew, I never even dreamt. But now I know, I know. Now I wonder that I fully realize. Oh, what a flowery track lies before me henceforth. What a dust cloud shall spring from behind me as I speed on. Sorry, my page doesn't want to turn. There you go. What carts I shall fling carelessly into a ditch in the wake of my magnificent onset. Hard little carts, common carts, canary-colored carts. What are we to do with him? Asked the Mole of the Water Rat. Nothing at all, replied the Rat firmly, because there really is nothing to be done. You see, I know him from old. He's now possessed. He has a new craze, and it always takes him away in its first stage. He'll continue like that for a few days, and like an animal walking in a happy dream, quite useless for all practical purposes. Never mind him. Let's go see what there's to be done about the cart. A careful inspection showed that even if they succeeded in righting it by themselves, the cart would no longer travel. The axles were hopelessly bent, and the missing wheel was shattered into pieces. Poor cart. It was a nice little yellow canary-colored cart. The Rat knotted the horse's reins over his back and took him by the head, carrying the birdcage, its hysterical occupant, in the other hand. Come on, he said grimly to Mole. It's 5 or 6 miles to the nearest town, and we'll just have to walk it. The sooner we make a start, the better. But what about Toad? Asked the Mole anxiously as they set off together. We can't leave him here, sitting in the middle of the road by himself. In the distracted state he's in, it's not safe. Supposing another thing were to come along. Oh, bother, Toad, said Rat savagely. I've done with him. They had not proceeded very far on their way, however, when there was a pattering of feet behind them, and Toad caught them up and thrust a paw inside the elbow of each of them, still breathing short and staring into vacancy. Now, look here, Toad, said Rat sharply. As soon as we get to town, you'll have to go straight to the police station and see if they know anything about that motor car and who it belongs to, and lodge a complaint against it. I got a message. Just a sec, just checking something. Ooh, neat. Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. And then you'll have to go to the blacksmith or a wheelwright's and arrange for the cart to be fetched and mended and put to rights. It'll take time, but it's not quite a hopeless smash. Meanwhile, the Mole and I will go to an inn and find a comfortable room where we can stay till the cart's ready, until your nerves have recovered their shock. Police station? Complaint, murmured Toad dreamily. Me complain of that beautiful, that heavenly vision that's vouchsafed me so? Mend the cart. I've done with carts forever. I never want to see that cart or hear of it again. Oh, Ratty, you can't think of how obliged I am to you for consenting to this trip. I wouldn't have gone without you, and then I may never have seen that swan, that sunbeam, that thunderbolt. I might never have heard the enthralling sound or smelt that bewitching smell. I owe it all to you, my best of friends. The Rat turned from him in despair. You see what it is, he said to Mole, addressing him across Toad's head. He's quite hopeless. I give it up. When we get to town, we'll go to the railway station, and with luck, we may pick up that there will be a way to get us back to the riverbank tonight. And if ever you catch me going a pleasure in with this provoking animal again, he snorted, during the rest of the weary trudge, addressed his remarks exclusively to Mole. On reaching the town, they went straight to the station and deposited Toad on the second-class waiting room, giving a porter 2 pence to keep a strict eye on him. Then they left the horse at the inn stable, and gave what directions they could about the cart and its contents. Eventually, a slow train having landed them at the station not very far from Toad Hall, they escorted the spellbound, sleepwalking Toad to his door, put him inside, and instructed his housekeeper to feed him, undress him, and put him to bed. Then they got out of their boat from the boathouse, sculled down the river home, and at a very late hour sat down to supper in their own cozy riverside parlor, to Rat's great joy and contentment. The following evening, the Mole, who had risen late and taken things very easy all day, was sitting on the bank fishing, when the Rat, who had been looking up from his friend in gossip, came strolling along to find him. Heard the news, he said. There's nothing else been talked about all along the riverbank. Toad went up to town by an early train this morning, and he has ordered a very large, very expensive motor car. Oh, no. Toad's ordered a motor car. Oh, no. Toad's ordered a motor car. Those are the first two chapters of the book. Again, this is like a 300-page story. I'm gonna try to do like regular readings for the rest of November and December. I really like doing story time with you all. I hope you like the train. Again, this is a game called On Track. It is on Steam. You can set music and you can change it. You can change the times if you want to. You can have it do like a day and night cycle and all that good stuff. I turned the sounds down just because I didn't want to because I was doing the story time and I didn't want it to be like super loud. But yeah, if you like train sounds, I think this is really cool. So I wanted to do this because I like having something in the background too while I read, so it's not like just me reading. Sometimes I'm just gonna read in the library and stuff, but I thought this was neat, and it felt like it worked with the Wind in the Willows because they literally ride a train. Aw, thank you, Night Wanderer. I appreciate that. People have said they like my voice. A few people have said they like the story times. I get nervous about doing them, but I really appreciate y'all being here and hanging with me while we did this. Let me see if anyone I know is online. If they are, we will do a little raidity raid. If they aren't, then we will just call it a day. Let's see. Let me see here. Who do I know who's online? Let's see. You know what? No one I know is streaming right now, so I think I will just call it an evening. Until next time, Pebbles, as always, do remember to play more games and be safe. I try to stream twice a week, so I will probably be streaming tomorrow. It might be very, very late. It could be very, very early. It depends on when I wake up. But I hope that you all have a wonderful day with wonderful friends in wonderful places. Good night.